Welcome to the Capitol News. I am your host, Alex Kreitis. Today is May 9th, 2019. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope everyone out there is doing well. Topic of today's podcast: a constitutional crisis? Are we in the midst of a constitutional crisis? I mean, that is what the Democrats would lead you to believe, that the president is off his rocker, that he is beyond the pale, he's out of control, that he, despite the Bob Mueller report, makes no difference. Now, they are sort of off the president's back when it comes to the whole Russia stuff. There was no collusion. There was no conspiracy. That's done. I mean, they had to eat crow. But of course, in the world in which we live, in a mainstream media-driven 24/7 news environment where there is most definitely a liberal bias, especially when you're talking about NBC, CBS, ABC, CNN, MSNBC. Everybody has a liberal bias. They do not like the president. They do not like his team, his administration. They do not like what he stands for. And, they just want him impeached. They want to make their listeners, their audience, believe that we are in the midst of a constitutional crisis. Why? Because there was no Russian collusion or conspiracy. The president did not break the law. He did not commit treason, yet somehow we are in the midst of a constitutional crisis because of what the president did not do. Somebody is either over-medicated or needs to be medicated, or somebody is off their medication. That's what's going on, and that's pretty representative of the United States of America, too, unfortunately, pathetically. I mean, that's where we are. You're either over-medicated, under-medicated, or you need to be medicated. I mean, that's pretty much it. There's only a handful of people out there that are not on any type of medication. Again, maybe they need to be. I don't know. I hope they don't. I hope if you're not taking medicine, you continue not to take medicine, because most of it's garbage. But nevertheless, that's where we live. This is what it is. It's all about those dollars. You can't watch TV for 5 minutes without seeing a drug commercial, and everybody's happy. Of course, the side effects are 10 times worse than what you got, but you want to take it, and you want to just walk. You want to run into the doctor's office and request these drugs, because that's what you do. That's what we do here in the United States of America. We write about it extensively in the Cynic's Guide to Investing. You say, what's that have to do with anything? Well, read the book, and you're going to see how much money is to be made in the healthcare industry. Whether you're talking about the insurers, whether you're talking about big pharma, there's a lot of money, folks. And then when you look at the demographics of this country with everybody getting older, I mean, my goodness, there could be windfalls, unless, of course, something devastating happens, which that is a possibility if there is a major reset. But nevertheless, if you just look at the current trends of how things are going, money is to be made in that space. Check it out, The Cynic's Guide to Investing. It was relevant 4 years ago when it was published. It is still just as relevant, if not more so, today. But getting back to the whole question of constitutional crisis, this is the lingo now. This is the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. Maybe we have to impeach the president. Maybe the president, just by his very actions, is going to basically impeach himself. Or wait a minute, maybe the president is goading us to impeach him. She scratched her head. Maybe too much sun out there in California. Or maybe it's the human feces out there, the mess that's taking place that's messing with her brain. I mean, it's already been messed with, but nevertheless, it's another variable in the equation that might finally explain what's going on with Nancy Pelosi. What is taking place in our country? Because we have a constitutional crisis raised as a question for a man, the President of the United States, who did not commit treason. This is after an extensive 22-month investigation by a man who both sides of the aisle said was beyond reproach, Bob Mueller, $30 million, a dozen and a half attorneys, forensic accountants, $30 million, hundreds of witnesses, millions of pages of documents, no collusion, no conspiracy, and also no obstruction of justice. Now, the Russian stuff is put to the side, but now the Democrats, almost called them Russians, the Democrats, although they do want to be socialists nowadays, so the Democrats, the liberals, the mainstream media, our quote-unquote elected leaders want to impeach the president because he obstructed justice. Of course, he didn't, but this is the argument they're going to make. They're going to grasp not only at straws, but they are grasping at air. The person were the two people who were pretty much tasked with making this decision. Although it could have been made by Bob Mueller himself, he punted. He said, no, I'm not going to make this decision. Instead, I'm going to give it to the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein and Attorney General Bill Barr, which ultimately it was Bill Barr's decision because he is the Attorney General. However, because former Attorney General Jeff Sessions recused himself with all that drama back there a couple years ago already, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein became the acting Attorney General in regards to the Bob Mueller investigation. So you have Rod Rosenstein and Bill Barr sit down, they make a decision, they make a determination. Well, they know from the Mueller report there is no conspiracy, there is no collusion. So that's gone. But now it's a little harder of a determination as to whether or not there was truly obstruction of justice. They basically made the determination that the government could not move forward because they could not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the president had committed obstruction of justice. So that was their decision. That was their determination. Now, of course, you knew all political hell and fury was going to break out, and it did. The Attorney General, during his testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee, was belittled. I mean, he was slandered by Democrat senators. It was another three-ring circus. They should be ashamed of themselves for that type of performance. I mean, and to Bill Barr's credit, he stood his ground very much so. He was anticipating that type of, shellacking, if you will. And he gave it right back. And he made a very good point. He said, you know what, the Democrat process is in place here. We can vote in 2020 to make the determination as to whether or not the American people want Donald J. Trump to remain the president of the United States for another 4 years, or we'll see you later, we want somebody else. I mean, that was a pretty good response in my book because there was no crime. The whole kit and caboodle had to do with conspiracy and collusion. There was none. Then the whole story became, we don't like Bill Barr's 4-page summary. And then we came to find that Bob Mueller didn't like how that was handled either. However, there was nothing of import that was ultimately said in that letter from Bob Mueller to Bill Barr. Nothing. He just didn't like how Bill Barr handled the summary in the press conference. But all of the information that Bob Mueller was concerned about was in the report that was released to the public and to Congress, and it was not. It was not redacted. That means you and I and everybody else can go and read it. So the Democrats were complaining about absolutely nothing, just to stir the Kool-Aid, just to keep it going. We have real issues in this country, but they want to pretend that there is a constitutional crisis because the President of the United States did not commit a crime. This and some of these people that were on the Judiciary Committee, Spartacus and Kamala Harris, are running for President of the United States. You want these people to be the President of the United States? I don't. I really don't. I have a lot of issues with President Trump, but I don't want these people being in there. Not for a second. But, I want to sort of move this away from just this constitutional crisis that is being thrown upon us now by the Democrats, Nancy Pelosi, Elijah Cummings, Jerry Nadler, Adam Schiff, Maxine Waters. You know the names. This is not a surprise to us here, but this is the lingo, this is the language. We are not going to get much of anything done over the next year and a half. We're just not, because the Democrats have dug in too deeply. They're not going to move. They might not come out directly with the impeachment process because this is what the president wants. He wants this to take place. In some degree, the president wants it to take place because he knows it will be completely disastrous and destructive to the Democrat Party, which it would be. Because it would just discuss not only, obviously, the president's base, which is still very much behind him, but it would also, I think, truly upset a lot of independents who were basically saying, enough is enough. We've been told, and maybe some independents were on the fence and saying, maybe this guy did, maybe he did commit treason. Maybe he did commit conspiracy with the Russians, And who could blame some of these people if this is the news that they were listening to? They were placing their trust in CNN, in NBC, and MSNBC, and ABC, and CBS. And then lo and behold, what comes out? There was nothing there. So now I think that even a lot of the people who are down the middle of the line, and even some people who are maybe clinging to hope, they were somewhat anti-Trump. Now, with the truth, they're like, the Democrats, you got to give this up. The mainstream media, you got to give this up. And you're seeing poor ratings in the mainstream media, particularly CNN and MSNBC. And it's no surprise. People don't like being lied to. And so their ratings are suffering as a consequence. But these people are lunatics, and they're clinging at air. And they are trying to now make the case that the president obstructed justice. And now, because the president is tired of being investigated for 2 years, he is now playing hardball with members of Congress who are subpoenaing either documents and or individuals to testify. These people have already testified before the Mueller team. This information has already been given to that investigation, and a conclusion has been determined. Bob Mueller is not coming out and saying that the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General lied. That did not take place. If that took place, we would be in a completely different situation right now. If Bill Barr had come out and said there was no conspiracy, and then Bob Mueller came out and said, no, what are you doing? What are you talking about, man? Clearly there was conspiracy. Forget constitutional crisis. We could be at civil war. Who knows what would have happened if that took place? But it didn't. There is no conspiracy. There is no obstruction of justice. From Bill Barr, Rod Rosenstein, and Bob Mueller. Okay? So get off of it. Get off of it. Now, I do want to pose the question of a constitutional crisis that links up to our other podcast today, the Economic Podcast, episode 65B, regarding the president taking to Twitter constantly and moving markets to huge degrees. Is that a constitutional crisis? That's a serious question I'm posing, by the way, not tongue-in-cheek. Is that the duty of the President of the United States to take to Twitter to talk about very sensitive issues that have the effect of moving markets? Is that his job? Is that his duty? I don't think it is. Is this a constitutional crisis? Is this a constitutional republic? When we virtually have a global dictator when it comes to the financial markets, takes to Twitter, makes a statement, off the cuff, maybe serious, who knows, and markets move. Percentage points. If you want a more detailed discussion of this, most definitely check out episode 65B. We go through it in its entirety today. We will continue to have this conversation tomorrow because that is the trade deadline before the tariffs go into effect. Actually, right now they are in effect because I do this podcast later in the evening on the East Coast of the United States. And at 12:01 on Friday, which is right now, the tariffs are in effect. This is only true for goods that leave China today, starting today. Any boat that is on the ocean, those goods are not subject to the tariffs. But anything from today forward will be, unless, of course, there is an 11th hour, 59th minute trade deal miracle, which we speculated here over the past couple days because this has been front page news for this week and it will continue tomorrow. And depending on what happens tomorrow, it may be front page news all of next week and who knows for how much longer. But we were speculating here this week that if a deal is struck, I am going to be of the mindset that there was always a deal, that this was just smoke and mirrors. This was just a game that was being played by the president to act like a strong man, that he could say, look, I got tough with the Chinese, and they came back on their knees begging for a deal this week. It's all it's going to be. It was already signed, sealed, delivered. On Sunday evening, the president takes to Twitter. The Chinese are backtracking. I don't like it. The trade negotiations are moving too slowly. We're slapping more tariffs on them. Pretty much all of their goods, and the rate of the tariff is going up. After all, the president loves tariffs. He's the tariff man, bringing in $100 billion to the U.S. Treasury, which is not true, by the way. And you also have to take into consideration the trade deficit that still exists with China. Now, I think there's most definitely some analysis being done, which should be done, economic analysis by the Trump campaign, the Trump team administration, regarding how much the tariffs are negatively impacting the United States versus how they are negatively impacting the Chinese economy. Now, of course, the president wouldn't spin it that way. Everything's fine. These tariffs are fantastic. In fact, they are a contributing factor to this quote-unquote economic miracle. you paying higher prices at the cash register because of an artificial tax that has been imposed arbitrarily by the president and his administration is somehow leading to an economic miracle. Of course, we know this is a bunch of baloney, but nevertheless, this is how the president spins it, which is why I come to the question, are we in the midst of a constitutional crisis with the president basically with his hyperbole, with his exaggerations, in some way, and sometimes just outright lies? I mean, I consider somebody to be a liar if they know the truth. The president on some of these issues has to know the truth, but says otherwise anyway. That's what makes you a liar. If you're simply reiterating something that somebody else told you and you're taking them for their word, okay, I'm not necessarily going to call you a liar, but you are continuing some sort of lie out there, okay? The person somewhere down the line knew the truth, but continued to say a falsehood. That's the liar, okay? So in some of these instances, the president most definitely knows the truth, but still comes out and tells everybody something else. That makes him a liar, okay? I call a spade, all right? There are other times it's hyperbole, it's exaggeration. Me personally, I'm fine with some of that stuff. It really doesn't bother me sometimes, but sometimes it does. But everybody's different. Some of you out there, it may drive you crazy. And I know a lot of people in this country, it does drive them crazy. Other people, they couldn't care less. That this president, he can do no wrong. That is a huge mistake to make. Because people who are following Donald Trump like that were probably calling people who followed President Barack Obama like that idiots. They were probably saying, how can you do that? How can you follow anybody blindly? Well, you're doing it with President Trump, and there are most definitely people out there of that cloth who said to people who were following President Obama blindly, how can you do that? You're a lunatic. You're crazy. But they are undoubtedly doing the same thing with President Trump. You got to get out of your silos, people. You got to get out of your bubbles. You got to do some independent thinking. Turn off the news. Go read some articles. Go read some books. Listen to some music. Take a walk. Don't pay attention. Don't just turn on Fox News. Don't just turn on MSNBC. Because if you just listened to MSNBC for 2.5 years, you thought Donald Trump was going to be crucified. And now he's not. He's not guilty of anything with this. And if you were watching only Fox News, you thought there was no problem whatsoever. That some of the stuff that does talk about obstruction of justice, I mean, there's some stuff in there, folks, that just ain't that pretty. We talked about this in the lead up to all of this investigation and the conclusion of it, that there were going to be things in this report that gave Bob Mueller, if you will, some cover to say, look, there was no crime, but, if you want to argue some of these tidbits, some of these points, your politicians, your lawyers, this is what you're going to do. And that's exactly what we're seeing. So we weren't surprised by any of this. But you cannot just stick to what you think, because nobody is right 100% of the time. So if you only go to your silo, if you only go into your corner, all you're going to do is continually reinforce your thinking. Nobody is right 100% of the time. So you're going to constantly reinforce some of your mistakes. That's not how it's supposed to be. We're supposed to do our best to improve ourselves. I know that's not the easiest thing. It's easier said than done, but you got to flip the station every once in a while. You got to listen to somebody else. Even if it's just to say, my goodness, are these people crazy? Go do it and prove it to yourself if that's the case. This isn't right, blah, blah, blah. And then take to Twitter, take to Facebook, and inform other people that, this isn't right, something's amiss. Start a podcast, do something. Don't get siloed. Don't just follow people blindly. Because I'm serious when I ask the question, is this a constitutional crisis, from the standpoint of the president taking to Twitter, making statements that move markets to the degree that he does. And he knows perfectly well that he's doing it. This is a game to him. I made the point on the economic podcast, and I'm going to reiterate it here. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of it because it's a non-story, which is why we didn't cover it this week. But you had the New York Times come out with copies of about 10 years of Donald Trump's tax returns or tax filings, I believe from 1985 to 1994, showing that he basically didn't pay tax and he lost $1 billion over this time period. This is no surprise to anybody who's been paying attention to this man. Everybody knows Donald Trump's story, that he basically went broke. He went bankrupt. Multiple corporations that he had started have gone under. Yet he brought himself back from all of that. Okay? This is no surprise to any of that. But because this was out in the news, the president took to Twitter to defend himself. And I don't blame the president for doing that. Anybody would do that. And he basically said in the tweets, look, in the 1980s, early 1990s, a lot of real estate developers were suffering. It's a tough business. People were losing money. This is what you do. This is the law. We were taking advantage of the law, not of finding loopholes or whatever. We were just using the law. There was nothing shady, nothing illegal. Tax shelters, it allowed you to renegotiate things with the banks, blah, blah, blah. At the end, he signed off and said it was good sport. Well, what did he mean it was good sport? The whole game, the whole thing, it was all a big game to him. Yeah, you know what? It's just on paper. I can go and I can build all these buildings. I can have bankers come to me and say, well, you know, Donald, we need all this money. He can say, well, I don't have it, and then we're going to go to negotiate. So I'm going to get better terms because I owe them a lot of money. Okay? So this was all good sport to the president. His words. All right? If you transfer that to the present day and what's taking place, I think the president thinks it's good sport, it's good fun to take to Twitter and tweet that a trade deal is going to be done, which is what we heard for the past 5 months, and the markets move to the upside. And we've talked about this exhaustively here. Why? Because we have to, because it's important. Because when you have one individual moving markets to this degree, you have to talk about it. You have to be informed because you have to ask yourself, do you want this? Is this what you want your president to be doing? Because he has another year and a half to go. It could be basically another 5.5, 6 years if he wins re-election, and I still believe he's going to win re-election. But do you want your commander-in-chief, your president of the United States, to take to Twitter to move markets to the degree that he moves them, if at all? In a world of 7 billion people, one person moves the markets like this. I don't like it for a second. And that's why I'm asking the serious question, is that a constitutional crisis? Maybe that falls outside of the purview of a constitutional crisis, but it's most definitely an issue that the president should not be involved in this from my perspective. Because how many of you out there are close to retirement? I mean, what's going to happen? I mean, for the past 5 months, it's been a V-shaped recovery with the S&P 500 making new all-time highs, with the NASDAQ making new all-time highs. But we still have not seen new all-time highs in the Dow Jones Industrial Average or the Russell 2000, the small cap index, or maybe most importantly, the New York Stock Exchange. In fact, we haven't seen highs at all in the New York Stock Exchange until last year. I think it was January of 2018. The New York Stock Exchange is the big board. It's the big boy. It's the granddaddy of them. It's basically been rolling over. So what's going to happen with these markets? I mean, I don't know, because we have a commander-in-chief who gets on Twitter, makes comments, and markets move hundreds of points to the tunes of, get this, folks, an article earlier today I came across, just in the past 4 days, global equities have shed $2 trillion. $2 trillion in the course of a few days. How are you supposed to prepare for that if you're retiring pretty soon? How are you supposed to do it? Like I said earlier, I mean, you know, I'm in my early 30s. I got another 30 years plus to go. You know, I can weather the volatility. But what if you're close to retirement? What if you've done a lot of things right? You've saved up. You put money in the stock market. You're collecting dividends. You're doing a whole bunch of things right. You worked hard. And now you got some lunatic, and I have to call the president a lunatic now, unfortunately, going to Twitter and moving markets to this degree. How can you prepare for that? There is no market advisor, investment advisor out there who can prepare you for this. Not at all. And that ain't right. That ain't right. You and I are supposed to be determining the price level of things. This market, its job is to find fair value. Because what was the news today? Because the markets here in the U.S. did close down for the day, but they were well off of their lows for the day because the president came out in the afternoon and said, well, you know, the Chinese trade delegation is here. Maybe we will make a deal, but I would still love to hit Beijing with tariffs. And President Xi of China sent me a beautiful letter. It was just a beautiful letter. And, you know, we'll see what we can do. You know, I talk about lunatics on the Democrat ticket for 2020. Is the president going to have to go into that barrel as well? I really hope not, because I do my best to call a spade, call it like I see it, and that's what the Capitol News is all about. You might agree with me, you might disagree with me, that's fine. I don't care, to be honest with you. That's what I'm here for. I take on any debate gladly. You can present information to me. I am very open-minded. I can change my mind. But this is really beyond the pale. I mean, because, again, if you check out episode 65B, we provide some context. What's $2 trillion? What's $2 trillion? The French economy is $2.5 trillion. Brazil's $2.5 trillion. $2 trillion is larger than Canada. It's larger than Italy. That was wiped off the global stock exchanges in 4 days because one individual, the President of the United States, had to take to Twitter. And my goodness, it's going to be interesting to see what happens tomorrow. Are we in the midst of some sort of constitutional crisis? Or is it something else? Thank you so much for joining me today, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a pleasure having you. As always, please like, share, subscribe, get the word out. Leave your comments. We would love to hear from you. This is the Capitol News. I am Alex Koritis. Godspeed.